You are not just matter. What light reveals about reality. Modern society has trained us to see matter as something solid, heavy, silent, and mostly meaningless, while light is often treated as something beautiful but distant, almost poetic. And this separation has shaped the way we look at the body, the universe, and even ourselves. But what if this separation is far too small? And what if matter is not the opposite of light, but part of a much deeper story in which energy, form, life, consciousness, and transformation belong together? This is not about turning physics into religion, and it is not about claiming that science proves every spiritual belief, because a mature spiritual view must never abuse science to create comforting illusions. The deeper question is more honest and more powerful. What does it mean for the human spirit when modern physics shows that matter is not dead substance, but part of a dynamic, energetic, and mysterious reality? One of the most famous formulas in human history is Albert Einstein's E=mc². And although many people know this formula as a symbol of genius, few truly stop to feel what it means for our understanding of reality. The formula says that mass and energy are deeply connected, and because the speed of light is squared in this equation, even a very small amount of mass corresponds to an enormous amount of energy. This does not mean that everything can magically become light, and it does not mean that physics proves the soul, but it does mean that matter is far more mysterious than a cold materialistic worldview often wants us to believe. Matter is not just stuff lying around in space. Matter is structure, relationship, potential, movement, order, tension, energy, and form, and part of a cosmic process that began long before the human mind started asking questions. This is where science and spirituality begin to touch the same mystery from different sides, because science speaks about photons, radiation, stars, fusion, mass, and energy, while spirituality speaks about inner light, divine light, awakening, truth, and consciousness. For thousands of years, spiritual traditions have used light as a symbol of knowledge, healing, clarity, life, and divine presence, and modern science does not need to prove these symbols in order to make them meaningful. The astonishing fact is that life on Earth is not only symbolically connected to light, but biologically, physically, and cosmically dependent on light. Because without the sun, there would be no forests, no food chains, no oxygen cycles, no animals, and no human life. Plants transform sunlight into chemical energy, and from this quiet miracle come the conditions that allow us to breathe, eat, move, think, love, and create meaning within the fragile beauty of this planet. Even the sun itself tells the story of mass and energy, because deep within its core atomic nuclei fuse, and a small part of mass is transformed into energy that travels through space and eventually becomes warmth, growth, life, and movement on Earth. So when spirituality says that light is sacred, this is not merely sentimental language, because every living body on this planet is part of a great story written by sunlight, chemistry, cosmic history, and biological intelligence. Yet this is exactly where we must stay precise, because a serious spirituality does not need exaggeration, and it does not become stronger by pretending that Einstein proved immortality or that physics confirms every mystical claim. The real wonder is already strong enough, because physics shows that under extreme conditions, light can be involved in the creation of matter, when highly energetic photons produce matter and antimatter pairs in very specific processes. This does not happen in ordinary sunlight, and it is not a magical event, but it still reveals something deeply fascinating. The border between light and matter is not as absolute as our everyday perception suggests. The opposite movement is also known, because when matter and antimatter meet, they can annihilate and transform mass into energy, including high-energy photons, which again reminds us that form is not final and appearance is not absolute. Spiritually understood, this does not mean that everything simply dissolves into divine light, but it does suggest that transformation is written into the very structure of reality, and that what appears fixed may be part of a much greater movement. This is one of the oldest insights of mature spirituality. Life is not possession, life is process. And the attempt to hold everything forever may be one of the deepest misunderstandings of the human ego. When we look into the universe, we are also looking into the history of light, because much of the light we see from distant stars and galaxies has traveled for millions or even billions of years before reaching our eyes or our instruments. The cosmic microwave background is often described as the oldest light we can observe, and it comes from a time when the universe was still young, long before stars, planets, human cultures, religions, languages, and personal stories appeared. This should make us humble, because the human being is not standing outside the universe as a detached observer, but is made from the same cosmic story that produced stars, elements, planets, oceans, bodies, nervous systems, and consciousness. In a deep philosophical and spiritual sense, the human being can be seen as the universe becoming aware of itself, not as a scientific proof of doctrine, but as a powerful image for our belonging within the whole. This changes the way we see the body, because many spiritual traditions have treated the body as lower, heavy, impure, or something to overcome, while the deeper truth may be that the body is one of the most sacred expressions of matter. The body is not merely flesh, and it is not a prison for the spirit, because it is earth, water, minerals, carbon, oxygen, warmth, electrical activity, cellular communication, memory, vulnerability, and conscious experience. To despise the body in the name of spirituality is to misunderstand the depth of matter, because the body is the place where energy, substance, perception, relationship, pain, joy, and awakening meet. At the same time, we should not turn the body into fantasy, because spiritual language often speaks of the aura, the light body, or the human being as a being of light, and these images can be meaningful without being misused as scientific proof. The human body does emit extremely weak light, often described in research as ultra-weak photon emission or biophotons, but these emissions are far too weak to be seen with the naked eye and are connected to biochemical processes. This is fascinating enough, and we do not need to turn it into a false proof of a visible aura, because a mature spirituality becomes stronger when it respects scientific boundaries instead of crossing them carelessly. The miracle does not become smaller when we describe it precisely. It becomes larger, because precision protects wonder from becoming superstition and allows spirituality to remain intellectually honest. There is another sentence often used in spiritual circles: consciousness is energy. And while this sounds powerful, it must be understood carefully, because energy in physics is a measurable quantity, while consciousness is subjective experience, attention, memory, feeling, meaning, and inner presence. Science has not fully explained consciousness, and therefore it would be wrong to claim that consciousness is simply energy in the physical sense. But as a spiritual metaphor, the sentence still carries a meaningful truth. Consciousness is not passive, because it shapes attention, influences behavior, changes relationships, forms decisions, and determines whether we treat the world as a dead resource or as a living field of responsibility. A person who feeds only fear creates a different atmosphere than a person who practices compassion, and a society that sees nature only as raw material will act differently from a society that recognizes the sacred depth of life. This is where spirituality becomes practical, not as escape from reality, not as decoration, and not as vague positivity, but as a deeper perception of reality that changes how we live, speak, consume, love, grieve, and take responsibility. Then comes the most difficult question: what happens when we die? And do we in some sense become light again? Or is this only a comforting image created by human longing? Physically, the body does not simply dissolve into spiritual light after death, because it changes, decays, releases heat, enters material cycles, and becomes part of the world again through processes that are natural and measurable. Physics does not prove personal immortality, and it does not prove that the ego survives death. But it also shows that death is not simple annihilation in the childish sense, because form ends while matter and energy continue in transformed relationships. Spiritually, this opens a deeper space of questioning, because we may ask whether consciousness is more than brain activity, whether the soul is a reality not yet measurable, or whether the soul is humanity's deepest language for meaning, love, and identity. We should not answer these questions too quickly, because cheap certainty is not wisdom, and a mature spirituality can live with mystery without pretending to know what it cannot honestly prove. Perhaps immortality is not the endless continuation of the ego, and perhaps the deeper form of immortality is the way love, courage, truth, and consciousness continue to affect the world through what we have lived and given. A kind word can change a person. A courageous decision can change a family. A work of truth can touch readers long after its author has died. And a life lived with compassion can continue to shine in ways no instrument can measure. This is not physics, but spiritual anthropology. Because the human being becomes meaningful not by clinging to life as property, but by allowing life to move through them as clarity, love, responsibility, and transformation. Light is one of humanity's oldest spiritual symbols, but light should not be romanticized, because light is not only comfort, warmth, and beauty. Light also reveals what was hidden and shows the shadows we would rather avoid. To say that the human being carries light does not mean that the human being is automatically pure or enlightened, because every human being also carries fear, wounds, desire, confusion, power, shadow, and contradiction. The light of the human being lies not in pretending to be without darkness, but in the capacity to become conscious of darkness and to transform it through honesty, humility, compassion, and responsibility. This is why the relationship between light and matter matters so deeply today, because our age often swings between cold materialism and uncritical esotericism, and both extremes fail to honor the full depth of human existence. One side says that the human being is only matter, while the other says that matter is irrelevant and only spirit matters. But light and matter together point toward a wiser vision in which body, world, consciousness, and mystery belong together. Einstein's formula is not a religious statement, but it is a formula of wonder, because it reminds us that the solid world is not as solid as it seems, and that matter is not as banal as a shallow worldview may claim. So the real spiritual question is not whether physics can prove our beliefs, but what kind of human beings we become when we realize that we are made of matter, living from light and capable of consciousness. Maybe the human being is not merely an accident in a dead universe, but a place where matter begins to ask questions, where light becomes awareness, and where consciousness learns responsibility. We are matter. We live from light, and we transform energy into thoughts, words, love, decisions, works, and consequences that may continue to shape the world long after our bodies have changed form. This is not cheap comfort, but an invitation. Do not try to become light by escaping the world, but become light by living more consciously, more truthfully, and more lovingly within it. If this reflection speaks to you, subscribe to Spirit Online for more videos on spirituality, consciousness, science, and the deeper questions of human existence. And share this video with someone who still believes that matter is dead and wonder has no place in a serious mind.